Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
All right. Well, welcome back to everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. This is now episode number 53 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We've got all the usual suspects back, except for Viet and Nigel. Some of the usual suspects are back. So we got Scotty in the shop here. We've got Dusix and Jeanette, who are fresh back from SEMA, and that is going to be our talking point from the day because there's a lot to discuss there. And we've got Tasso joining us again from the deep, deep woods in the foothills here in Colorado. So let's dive into SEMA this year. So that as we're recording this, SEMA happened, what was it, just a couple days ago at this point. It was last week. So Ryan and Jeanette, because honestly, I completely forgot that SEMA was happening last week. There's a few orders I was trying to get going for customers, and I completely forgot that everything had shut down and gone to SEMA. I completely lost track of time. You guys have been out there. What was kind of your initial impressions? What did you guys think?
Well, Jeanette, you were there. You went there in 2019, so I think talking about just the size of it would be a good start.
Yeah, so 2019 was my first time to SEMA. Obviously, they didn't do one in 2020. And then coming back, it definitely was smaller. It was much, much smaller. I feel like they made good use of the extra space though, because it felt like they had a lot more cars in display and you actually had space to take pictures from them. Whereas the year before, everything was crammed in so tight, it was a little bit more overwhelming.
Okay.
So I feel like even though it was way smaller, SEMA did a really good job adapting to it, and they still put all their energy into it. If that makes sense. So
if I'm hearing you right, so there was more room between exhibitors and in the walking paths, so everything wasn't so just jam packed together as it has been.
Yeah, I would say that, and then some of the exhibitors just got more space to bring in more cars,
okay.
And the cars were actually and Brian and I even discussed, we didn't know if that was a social distancing tactic or if it was just for display and take up more space. And I think it was really display and take up more space because besides the mask mandate, they didn't really seem too concerned about social distancing.
I'm sure that there had to have been fewer exhibitors there because if they're at full capacity, just from my recollection of being there, I mean they try and fill almost every square inch of space for an exhibitor and then just have minimal walking paths. But yeah, in the current day and age, I don't think they would be able to do that because usually you're just kind of walking around and just this clump of people everywhere. So
well, and it was kind of funny because there were definitely less exhibitors, but Ryan and I noticed there were some empty spaces that had a business name there. So the spot was reserved for them, but they just decided not to come. Sure. And then Ryan, I forget who we heard it from, but SEMA put out a rule if you're a priority exhibitor and you don't come this year, you're going to lose your priority spot next year. So people would pay for a spot and then just decide not to come because it wasn't worth their trip this year, which I'm not sure why that would be, why exhibitors decided not to come this year. Just because they knew it was going to be smaller? I don't know.
Or just logistics.
I think it was Savannah was saying it too. And I think, it could be just that hard to get in there because imagine if it's totally packed out and everything, that if you're probably trying to fight for space if you have a decent sized booth or you want to be in a particular spot.
From what I've heard, and this is totally hearsay, but this is what I've been told from a couple people that work for companies that have exhibited at SEMA, is you have to kind of work your way into the bigger rooms. There's always a tent outside, which is kind of the first year. The first year that you exhibit, they don't even give you a space in the building. That's that's kind of the new exhibitor space, but then you have to be out there, then come into the smaller room, and then you have to exhibit for so many years to get into the big room. I remember talking to some guys from Cobb at one point. I don't think they've been to SEMA or exhibited at SEMA in a good while, but they had to exhibit for so many years just to be able to even have a chance of getting into the main room. So that could be part of the motivation there.
That makes sense. I think with any annual event where vendors or exhibitors have to compete for spots, you're always going to give priority to the loyal ones. But the way that they have it organized is different halls are like kind of different sides of the industry, or they're catered to different customers. So I feel like the outside ones were more, so when you're outside, you don't have to be in the industry to go see those things. Anybody off the street can walk in and see those things. So I feel like the outside was more catered to entertainment. And then, so I'm not sure if they would be forced to be outside and then inside, because it seemed pretty organized by category, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But yeah.
Well, and kind of one of the things that SEMA, I feel like SEMA often is kind of a litmus test. Like it's kind of a preview of the direction that the industry is moving maybe in the next year, because a lot of times manufacturers, they use SEMA to like release products or showcase, like, here's this new thing that we're working on or that's coming down the pipe. And a lot of time in the booth, like I think the last time I was there was 14 or 15, something like that, when the BRZ came out, and there were BRZs and FRSs everywhere. Like that was like you could throw a rock and bounce it off 3 of them. I mean, every exhibitor had a BRZ or an FRS in their booth, it seemed like. And you could tell, they're like, okay, well, this is obviously the hot car, and this is where like a lot of manufacturing is going to go into. Actually, maybe it was after that. Then I remember going there, and it was just like trucks everywhere. Like trucks had taken over from Sport Compact. Just it was, Ford trucks, just trucks everywhere. And that was where it was like, okay, that's interesting.
It's still like that too. I mean, you saw like several of the new BRZ FRSs, I guess mostly BRZs, and you saw definitely a handful of Supras. But I mean, from what I understand, the truck segment or the off-road segment, or even like the overland segment, is just really blowing up. So I mean, if you were kind of like following where the money is being spent in general and like vehicle modifications, I'm told that like the trucks in like the last 10 years have just absolutely blown everything up. I mean, you go to when we went to the wheel side, where they had like wheels and tires and stuff, it was almost mostly truck wheels. Like we didn't really see any vehicle wheels, like car wheels in the truck side. Now you have a lot of overlap and stuff too. So like, you saw like the Volk in the Yokohama booth, they were in like the performance aftermarket, whatever, but in the wheel side, it was almost exclusively truck.
Oh, you're muted.
Do you think that has something to do with RPMX stuff and like sports cars maybe going extinct?
There was a lot of conversation about it there. I mean, there's a lot of people that are definitely worried about it. But I mean, wheels and tires aren't regulated from the RPM Act, right? You would think, if anything, if the RPM Act was something that a lot of manufacturers were really, really worried about, people would be making big pushes on getting wheels, new wheel brands, wheel faces, wheel designs, all that other shit out big time. Like, if you're going to do it at SEMA. And maybe that's why the truck wheels are getting so big, because diesel trucks have been the big target. Like, diesel performance have been the big target of the RPM Act. We think like in small world, like, oh yeah, our poor little import cars won't be able to get access ports anymore. And they're like, diesel trucks are like, our trucks are going to have to stay stuck, I mean, outside of suspension.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think, I mean, that has to be a part of it, Tasso. I mean, it's things are kind of like, that ship is really kind of on the move. And I, from one year to the next, I don't know what the immediate change is going to be. But I mean, I would assume that like there was a lot less exhaust options out there, if even any, that would be on display there. And like there's been a lot of issues. I mean, heck, even getting an exhaust in of late is difficult. The vast majority of any kind of like catback exhaust systems that are large enough that you can't put them on a plane, or at least not cost effectively, they've been on back order for months. Just like getting anything in is a massive challenge right now. So yeah, there's a lot of factors there, but yeah, wheels, tires, and suspension, especially for trucks versus cars. I mean, it's whatever your car's wheel and tire and suspension package would cost, pretty much add a zero, and that's what it would be for a truck, I think. There's
you guys happen to cruise by any of the? Because I mean, you brought up a good point. We're stuck in our little paradigm here of sports car stuff. Did you cruise by like the modern retro muscle car thing, like his Hooker and Magnaflow and stuff like that, still pushing out big, exhaust options for all those cars nowadays, or are they kind of tamed down also with the similar kind of emission stuff? Did you get a feeling for that?
I mean, I saw a lot of Vibrant stuff, and you saw MagnaFlow, and there was definitely a lot of resto mods. I think one of the craziest resto mod stuff that I think I saw was that I think General Motors or one of the big three is putting out like straight up like an electric motor power plant.
Yeah.
And I saw several of those where they were basically these 450 horsepower equivalent electric motors setups that were in Corvettes and Bel Airs and just goofy shit like that, that were like literally I think one of them was General Motors, and I think Ford might have had one too, but I can't remember which one had like a big prominent display in one of the booths. But like even when you went to the Foose booth, I mean, there's a lot of it's definitely with the Hellcats and the Mustangs and the Camaros and all that stuff that's out the way they are now. Tons of body overlays that we saw. Like we even saw I saw like a GT 350 with ITBs, but it looked like it was a 67 like Cobra, and so that was really common. I mean, you didn't see a lot of carburetor. I didn't see a lot of like big carburetor brands like, Edelbrock and stuff putting out stuff, but what you did see was weird electric like power plants going into like where you could buy like the full setup, like batteries, 450 horsepower equivalent electric motor and all this other stuff, and like drop it in like your old GT touring, whatever they called those cars back.
You're talking like crate motor, like electric crate motor packages?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Dude.
Ford just announced that they have a drop-in crate motor for their trucks.
Yeah.
Electric.
I think there was an F100 that they had there that they'd done an electric conversion on.
Yeah, I think
how much are they?
I don't know. I didn't really have the price, but that one truck that you're talking about, John, I think Amelia Earhart or whatever her name is, she did like a video with it, and the whole bed was batteries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Batteries and control. I was like, oh my God, that truck's got to weigh like 8,000 pounds.
Yeah. Amelia Hartford, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Or Earhart, whatever.
Or Earhart.
Yeah. She's flying. Who knows?
Yeah.
She's flying high.
Well, things are changing. You'd have to really have like a really specific focus to not see the things that are changing and coming down the pipe. I mean, things are kind of shifting in that direction, and the velocity at which things are kind of moving in that direction seems to be increasing. So it's something just kind of we're keeping an eye on. So yeah, we'll see. In fact, it might be worth a conversation at some point. Like the really interesting one, and I'll make this point, then we can move on, but is Subaru. Because Subaru has an electric car that's coming out, co-developed with Toyota. It wasn't supposed to be out until 2025. But now it's going to be available at the end of next year, end of 2022 as a 2023 model. So it was really pushed down the road for a good while, and then all of a sudden, like just out of nowhere, they ramped it up and basically pushed it forward 2 years, which is a long time if you're coming with the new platform that you have to develop from scratch, seemingly.
Is this supposed to be like a sports car or like economy car or what?
Nope, it's just a vehicle.
It's just a Subaru Outback or Forester, whatever that is, with electric power plant in it.
I thought they had like a plug-in already, or maybe they're just plug-in hybrids, huh?
Yeah, this is a fully electric vehicle that's going to be on a shared platform with Toyota. It was officially debuted. I think, man, I can't remember what they've got a name for it, but I can't remember it. But it's officially debuted. It's the height of a Crosstrek. I think it's the length of an Outback and the width of an Ascent or something like that. There's some weird set where like it has a lot of common sizes to a lot of the common vehicles, but it's a different grouping of them. Yeah, but okay.
I just
spoilers.
looked at
I like spoilers.
The Ford crate motor.
Yeah,
it's $3,900 for the Ford, like the Mach-E GT crate motor. 480 horsepower, 634 pound-feet, and it sold out really quick when they released it. But that sounds pretty good. I mean, you look at like your average built Subaru motor, and it's cheaper for more power or more torque, anyways.
I think the limitations are going to be on the weight. I think that they're definitely going to be; those things are definitely going to hit the resto mod market hard. Like I feel like And that was kind of like the feeling I got when I was there. Like, you didn't see like electric power plants swapped, I don't know, modern vehicles. It was mostly like your electric vehicles were the modern vehicles, you know, like your Mach-E or whatever they call that Mustang. But like the electric power plant stuff that I saw that was swapped was almost all resto mod stuff, which I think is a perfect segment for it, because I mean, most of those guys don't drive any of those things, and they look good, and it's technologically advanced where you can have all like the new fun stuff, and it doesn't matter if it weighs 6,000 pounds and is like a C10 pickup truck.
Yeah, I'm suddenly thinking about it from a hill climb perspective, right? Because it's like the ideal motorsport for it, because it's quick out of the corners, short duration racing.
Yep.
And so
there you go. I had to look it up because we mentioned it. I felt bad I didn't remember. It's the Subaru Solterra is the name of the Subaru. And so here's the spoiler. The rumor that I'm hearing is that Subaru is going to come out with a performance version of it. And it will be all-wheel drive. So the Subaru is all-wheel drive, which I guess electric means it's got to have 2 motors in it at least. And if Subaru is going to come out with a performance version of it, I think that's a good sign for us, for enthusiasts. You know, because it's like, at least they're thinking of like, how can we make it fun and exciting? You know, kind of like to your point, Toss, like there's some advantages to an electric power plant. I mean, let's not be frustrated by it. Let's lean into it. What can this method of a drivetrain really do well that we can optimize?
Okay, I got to
really
stop
want to
the.
stop on.
Let's stop the electric vehicle talk and get back to SEMA. How many actual race cars were there?
There were
race cars.
There were like real, obviously they're real race cars. We saw like a Ferrari. We saw several of the Porsches that did the hill climb. Like Dumas's car was there.
Yeah,
it was kind of fun to walk by Dumas's car and then take like a second step back, because when I saw pictures of it, it didn't click. When I saw it in real life, I was like, oh shit, this car was tested in the back lot of PPIR. You know, like it's kind of cool to see, you know, the handful of them. But man, I would put it under 10. Like it was, there's probably like 10,000 trucks and 10 race cars.
It was really funny because so many of these cars were like modded and portrayed like they were race cars, but really it was just all for looks. You can tell they never were on a track before. And so many times Ryan would come up to me, it's like, that doesn't even have a real roll cage in it. That's only a Ford. That would never pass NASA. Like it was just for looks. It wasn't actually built to function at all.
That's kind of one of the things that I noticed, just, you know, from whatever Instagram feed, is there were tons of track inspired cars there, and I don't know, I hate it. I'm sure I would have hated it even more if I was walking around with the, you know, the same reaction that you guys were having there, of just like, why build a track inspired car if you're never going to take it on the track?
I think the worst one, go ahead, Ryan.
I been getting, like, my VA buddies like Ben Martin and Trey and a couple other guys have been sending me this white STI that's like got Barris Aero and a bunch of other stuff on it, and they're like, I really love the body kit on this thing, and that's a wide body, and I really want to get my car to that, and it looks sick. Like, you go up and look at this car, and it's basically like a shittier than Cusco style roll cage, and I'm like, I hate this car so much, and now I hate it even more. Like, I love that, like, Time Attack in the scheme of things is getting exposure in the sense that there's pretty cars out there that look fast, but I hate it in the sense that, like, the true track sluts aren't in these shows, you know, and maybe they'll be like a PPIR, or PRI, but I doubt it.
Well, and SEMA for a while has moved. SEMA used to be the place for everything, and then PRI was just for like really dedicated race, like dirt circle track, NASCAR, like just race cars, period. And it seems like now, like a lot of like the more motorsports oriented stuff has moved from SEMA to PRI, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but then it's a lot more like I don't know what you'd say, like visual modifications or stuff, like appearance mods, lifestyle stuff that's at SEMA versus actual like motorsports stuff.
The unfortunate thing, and you're right, motorsports was actually a really small component of SEMA, and it's not a coincidence that the only motorsports panel seminar that they did was hosted by the PRI president. Like, that's not a coincidence. Yeah. But like it's almost like really unfortunate, because there was that one BRZ, and to be fair, it was a very cool looking BRZ, but it was at a booth that was advertising, and Ryan, you might have to help me, like a racetrack and like an HPD program. And they had like the pamphlets for HPDE all over the car, but you could tell this car, you wouldn't want it on the track. And like the stick shift in it was like, it was like a weird, like even the stick shift in it was like this weird thing that you'd have to put your hand in. Like it was all for looks, no driving at all. And it's almost unfortunate because we're constantly pushing people like, get the seat time first, don't build your car. Get the seat time first, don't build your car. And here's this ridiculously, and still beautiful, but ridiculously built BRZ that you would never drive on track, advertising an HPD program. It was like really actually unfortunate. Like it was mixed messaging, totally.
Yeah. I mean, like you would look at this thing and be like, dang, that's sick. And they got like a race seat and look at that big wang and diffuser and oh, it's supercharged. But I'm looking, I was like, look at those garbage Chinese tires, and things got like 1.5 degree of camber, and you know, it's got, I think it had aftermarket brakes, but like not a real, like a big brake brand. I was like, and you see a lot of that, you know. I mean, I was even seeing cars that they were posting on like Global Time and Tech, and sorry to call out anyone who is posting those pictures, and you go up and look at them, and these things were like we're excited to see this car come out the butt well, or see this and see that, and I get that helps drive the industry. But these things are like on cheap Chinese tires and like and just whatever it took to get the car there. I'm like, I don't know.
Which we are in a supply
I
chain crisis. So let's give them some like benefit of the doubt.
That's true.
Yeah.
But
now,
especially
so for tires, yeah.
So my next question is that attacking the clock, and those guys, I mean, they do some pretty cool stuff. The Sean, I can't remember. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
with that 270Z that's been at Pikes Peak a couple times, been out at Global, at Coda. The car's amazing, but that GS 300 that they had there, was it? I mean, it got so much press. It got so many photos. Everybody was posting that thing up, and I mean, it just, I didn't see what the hype was all about from pictures. What'd you think of it?
I mean, I think they do a good job with, like, I think Sean's big thing that everyone loves about what he does is that he's like a really good fabricator.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of like really, really nice fabrication efforts into it. But I mean, looking at it, it looks just like a really heavy Lexus that they're going to try. Like it didn't look, any aspect of it didn't look light, you know? I mean, so, and whether it's capable or not, depending on who they have drive the car, I mean, not to cut on Sean really, but like, that Z that they have has got a lot of potential, you know, and so I think they are good at building cars, but it'll be interesting to see what the cars can really do if they put somebody in them, you know.
Sure.
But it just looked like a big body show build, you know. It would fit in almost in like a VIP booth if you took the wings off of it. You
know? It seems like, I mean, it's almost kind of falling into the role of trying to spark imagination. Like trying to inspire somebody like, wow, that's really cool. I want to make my car look like that. Whereas like maybe now, because there are so many good and well documented and publicized race series going on now, that maybe like if you really want to see race cars doing race car things, you know, there's like Global, there's Grid Life, you know, there's a lot of actual racing. You can go out and actually see the race cars in action versus just
but
somewhere.
I mean, you have SEMA that's pushing the RPM Act. SEMA's pushing this stuff to keep converting cars into race cars, you know, to be completely legal. And you would think that there would be more of a push at a SEMA show for that. This is a 500 horsepower full emissions vehicle that if this is the way we need to go to make race cars, that this is the way we could go, and like a bigger push for that.
I wonder if that's gonna come at PRI, because that is much more motorsports focused.
Keep in mind too that SEMA owns PRI. Like
they do now.
They're the same company. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, that might be kind of like that might be the direction they're taking. They're taking a tradition. Well, I mean, let's face it, it's definitely a money thing. You know, there's definitely a money aspect to it. So if your big money generator vendors are big truck companies, then I mean, that's what's going to happen. I mean, even when you looked at like the big manufacturing companies, Toyota, Ford, Chevy. I mean, Hummer was even there. I mean, a lot of your big manufacturing companies, Nissan, all had trucks. Honda had a couple of cars, but they had like a 2-car booth, like for the Honda guys. But like the Toyota booth and like the Ford booth and the Chevy booth, those things were huge and they're like on opposite corners of each other, and they were all geared towards trucks.
Wow. Man. So, I mean,
sorry, but this, it might be a result of the current state of things and what vendors and booths exhibitors were willing to come out. But when you look at all the seminars that was like on the schedule and the majority of the booths, SEMA was really catering to a small business, auto body shop, mechanic, daily driver type audience. So it makes sense to me that, like, especially where they own PRI and that's the place for all the race car stuff, that they're not going to have that as big of their discussion. They talked a lot about supply chain issues and staffing issues, and then the EV, maybe a hint of the RPM was like below all of that. So like it was always like anytime they talked about barriers or industry, it was supply chain and staffing, something that was being felt by small businesses.
Well,
so that was like their main audience.
Issues.
What did they have to say about the supply chain?
So it's interesting because Ryan and I went to a couple of seminars where they had a panel, and one was the Motorsports one where they talked about it, and one was actually a bunch of journalists. Right. I was about to say influencers, but journalists. And then a couple of them were more like Larry Chen was one of them, like, obviously just amazing. And then a couple of them were more like Instagram journalists, so a little bit more influencer type. And it was funny. So they get both ends of the spectrum, where the Motorsports panel, who were all business owners and all presidents of their companies, were kind of like pushing about supply chain, that this is a sign that we need to bring manufacturing back to the States. A much more kind of like a conservative approach or a right-wing approach. And then the journalism side was like, this is a bear. I think what they said was, it's just a blip on the radar. It's just a temporary issue. People don't want to manufacture in the States, so leave it in the other countries. And this is all going to go away soon. I mean, am I capturing that right, Ryan? Would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think like Larry Chen, the journalist, I just want to put him out there just in case somebody's listening. He was definitely different than other panelists on the journalist side of things. But
he was the only one that understood the race industry too. Sorry, go ahead.
They like the interesting part about them, I felt like part of it was just like ignorance or denial. Like, it'll come back. And there's a lot of points that's right. Like the supply chain issues isn't necessarily limited to just manufacturing. I mean, I think a lot of supply chain issues are just like shipping and receiving, and you come to the US and you look at it from the US perspective. Our problem, if we were going to be manufacturing our own parts, would just be hiring people. Like, and that was one thing that you got like pretty much across the board from the motorsport, like I'll just say like owners, the business owners that did the motorsport one, is that those dudes were just like struggling to employ people, like find people to work, find people to even come. Like that was like everybody was, one of the guys was even saying that the radio, like they would be listening to satellite radio and there'd be a company on there advertising that they're willing to pay somebody $45 an hour to come over to their place and blah, 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 and do this. He said he would like turn like the radio off because he was paranoid that his employees would hear this. It'd spark up the idea like, well, I'm going to go to X, Y, and Z company and maybe make $45 an hour and move to Florida. And his thing was like, fuck, like we need, like these guys were having a hard time holding on to employees and finding employees and really getting like younger people, I'll say like the Gen Z or whatever they call it now, that really want to like are willing to work their way up from the bottom and learn everything that they need to know and go to the top. Like their expectations of them weren't high. Like there was guys saying like, if strive for perfection, and if you don't get it, that's okay. We'll just move on from there. But what they were saying is they can't even find people that are willing like to sweep the floor that don't want to make, that are trying to make $30 an hour. Like, oh, you're going to be in a machine shop? Yeah, that's $30 an hour, even if they're sweeping the floor. So if you combine those two ideas together, and then everything that we kind of know about economies of scale, like from the American side, sure, it would be easier if we wouldn't have supply chain issues from like a shipping delivery area per se, but we don't have the workforce, right? We definitely don't have the infrastructure, honestly. I mean, steel's more expensive here than is a manufacturer in any other country right now. And then if you go to and do it to China, where the steel is cheaper, the labor is considerably cheaper, they don't have unions and all the other economy of scale issues, then you have to get it over here. And there's just boats waiting up. There's boats waiting outside the coast of California and Florida. You know, I mean, it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's easy to take a broad brush stroke, and I think both of those guys were kind of taking a broad brush stroke from their own individual perspectives. And I mean, that was kind of interesting. And I think it was also interesting to kind of lead into a little bit more beyond that, is that they do not, like, if you think you have a person who's representing you as a partner, we'll call it, because Larry Chen was very much about like, let's not call them influencers. We need to be partners in this. If you have somebody who's like a partner for you, or like say a partner for Flatirons Tuning, or a partner for Wheels Pro or whatever, you almost want them to have the same understanding of your business struggles and kind of like your corporate values and stuff. And you could see like the biggest disconnect between the way that the corporate guys, like the business owners, are thinking, and the way kind of like the partners were thinking, and communicating and stuff. And I'd imagine as like a big race company, that would be really, really frustrating to be dealing with that if they represented the ideas of most influencers, which outside of Larry, I feel like they kind of did, honestly.
Yeah.
I feel like Larry was definitely the 100% the most reasonable person about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the situation that we're in right now. It's really strange. There's a lot of facets to it, and you touched on a number of them. And it's, I mean, what is it now? We're almost at 2022. So we're probably, let's call it basically at the 2-year point of when all this stuff started changing, and all these issues started to crop up. And we're actually hitting a point where it seems like things are slightly getting worse in the short term right now. The availability of stuff is getting a little bit, like, it's harder to chase down stuff right now. But it's one of those things where it does seem like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It seems like the problem itself, it's complicated, but the understanding for the problem is clear now, just because it's been going on for so long. But now the thing is, if you have a clear understanding of what the problem is, now they're trying to figure out the solutions. And so you got to figure out what the solution is, and then implement it, and try and like break down some of these barriers. Because it's probably going to be the answer is probably going to be a combination of everything that you said, plus waiting for the old like supply chain and everything to also come back. Because if you can get some new supply lines up and running, and kind of get the old supply lines up and coming, if those two can come together, or at some point, like, that's when, like, hopefully the availability stuff is going to be a lot improved.
I think I don't know if Jeanette was with me on this one. I think she was in a different conference, but was in a conference where it was kind of like small businesses. So these weren't like big giant race shops and stuff like that. And the conversation was about about small businesses and taking chances, like, for the most part. And one of the things that was interesting is they had 3 different business owners from three different like automotive segments, if you will. And the most interesting thing to hear was how each company had, I wouldn't necessarily say success, but adapted and survived. And so, for example, this one guy owns like this like classic car vehicle restorer in Texas or something, and they never put a used engine in any of their cars. Like, never did. Like, no way. Like, we're doing like $100,000 builds, and these cars are going to be perfect, and the customers are gonna they're gonna get exactly what they want. Well, then they had the change that idea, because now you can't get that stuff, or now you can't get cranks, or now you can't get like roller rockers, and you can't get bearings. And so he had to like start looking around, like, all right, well, what are you gonna do? It's like, well, he had like a customer is like, I'm gonna get a junkyard motor for your car, and like, this is what it's gonna take. I'm gonna have to find one, but like, there's just not availability of this style of motor that you want new. And if you want to wait 2 years, I mean, maybe we'll get it. Like, there's just no TDB. And so he was going around, started looking for like junkyard LS3s, and because of the demand, the junkyard LS3s, which used to be $1,500, are like $10,000 now. So he's spending $10,000 on used junkyard motors, and scouring the country for them to basically get a build put together for their customers who still, because I feel like the demand, and you guys probably see this more than anybody, like as much as anybody would, the demand for the stuff is still there. There's just not the availability. So people are gonna have to start having to get creative. Like, well, I'd never run a junkyard motor, but now I've got a refresh junkyard motor in my build, and that was all that's available. Or people like, I never would run a Tomica exhaust, but that's the only one that's available, and I want to drive my car this weekend. Like, I think that's that was pretty interesting to see, like in those small business, like the really small guys, how they're adapting in this climate. And a big part of it is just kind of like, you have to put all your feelers out there. Like this dude is literally sitting at like the bar at the hotel the night before this convention happened, and he overheard somebody talking about parting out a 1LE that got wrecked, and he was like, "How much you guys want for that?" because that's how desperate he's got the clientele. But if he can't keep the business rolling, then he ends up with a bunch of stale capital that he's sitting on that's just hurting him. And so it was pretty interesting to see, like, he would have never be listening about used car parts. And now he's like listening to strangers, like that shit's peeking his ear, because those are opportunities to keep the business rolling.
It's again, like we're 2 years into this thing. And I mean, you got to figure, 2 years is a long time. And like Jeanette, you're running a racetrack. And like, because it is now so long, like, everybody has had to pivot. We have had to change our mindset, the way that we're doing things, the way that we think about the process of keeping a business going, because if you cannot, it's long enough now that you cannot wait for things the way that they used to work or the way that they used to be priced to come back. You have to adapt. You've had no choice because of the time that's gone on.
You think it'll be kind of a survival of the fittest kind of thing? Because what I'm hearing is both with shops that are not willing to change the way they're doing things or change their practice or adapt to the pressures of the environment. But also, you're talking about, earlier you mentioned a lot of the influencers were not aligning with it, or maybe don't align so much with what the companies are really needing from them. You think we'll kind of shed some of the extra fluff of, kind of the shops that sprang up because it was a kind of a gold rush market there for a bit, or a lot of the influencers will kind of like lose their status because ultimately they offered little to no substance to it? Or do you think this is just end stage capitalism and we're going to ride this golden pony into the ground?
Pony into the ground? No.
I mean, not to put Flatirons on the spot, but I mean, these have been like probably your best couple of years in sales, right? I mean, the demand for the stuff is there, just having to be, and I think at this point, I think most consumers, maybe not a year ago, but I think most consumers understand now that like the supply chain issue is a long, it's like, it's really a thing. It's not just something that somebody's saying like, oh, you can't get Alcons. You guys are just saying that because you don't want to sell Alcons. You just want to upsell APs. Like, I think people understand like, all right, if I want to get my track, because all the events are happening. There's still track events happening, still lap days happening, still autocross happening. Like, people are just, I think that as long as the consumer is willing to be flexible and the companies are willing to be moderately flexible, that I think it's still kind of a golden era for that thing. But I mean, you'd have to be really, really stubborn as a company to not want to be flexible with your customer. But I think the customers are flexible. I think maybe a year ago, the customers were more rigid, like, well, I'll just wait for that HKS catback. And then like a year later, they haven't gotten it yet. And they just like, fuck it, I'll find it somewhere else. And then they find out that nobody can get the HKS catback. So it's like, all right, what do you want? And I think the consumers are going to continue to help drive that marketplace as long as the vendors are.
Yeah. I mean, so Jeanette, let me throw it to you, because you've been putting on events. What is your feeling? What is your feeling as far as attendance and demand for events? What do you think?
I mean, I think it was what everybody expected. 2020 was the year to be creative. Necessity is a driver of invention. And I think that survival of the fittest was already happening during that time. And just anybody who could adapt actually did pretty well. And that includes PPIR. We did in-car concerts for the first time. And then so 2021 was what everybody expected. Everybody was so stir crazy. They just wanted to get out of the house. And that was actually kind of like a little fun thing, because it was one particular event, a track attack, which is our most driver count series that we do here, where there was like a lot of women. There was just a lot of women who showed up, and they were all tied to either a girlfriend, like a female friend, or a boyfriend, or a husband. And it was in the early spring when there was just not that much going on yet, and they just wanted to get out of the house and talk to people. And that was like really kind of a cool surprise. But I mean, all our events had really high attendance 2021, and it was because people just wanted to get out. They didn't care about the cost or where they were at. It just needed to get out.
For whatever reason, I mean, what I would say is what we definitely saw is that cars as a hobby, just like cars as a hobby in general, was something that really, like, people's minds, it seems like people's minds went to that in like 2020 when everything kind of shut down, slowed down, whatever. I can't tell you how many people we talked to here where it's like, hey, my car's been down for like 2 years. I just haven't had the time to get it running again. Now I have the time.
I
can't do anything else. I've got to get the thing running again. So I'm calling you and I need help. I need this, that, and the other, because now I have the time to do this project again. And then I think too, like, Dusix, Tasso, talking to you guys. I mean, I remember, a year ago where there was no events and the frustration of events being closed down. I think a lot of people, like, let's be honest, racers, oftentimes we are not the best at planning our time efficiently. So, you've got 6 months before your next event and you've got all these things to do, and you end up still doing it the week before that event 6 months from now. And so when everything kind of shut down, I think some people, like, they use that time as like, all right, I wanted to do this big project or that big project. Let's tackle this thing. And so they took on a lot of those projects. And now I think then in 2021, once things kind of started opening up again, it's like people were excited, just like you said, Jeanette, to get back out there. But like a lot of people had worked on a project for like the last year that they were just dying to get on track and get back to the track, try this thing out.
And community.
Go ahead, Jeanette.
I was just going to say, community is a necessity in life. Everybody needs to have some sort of sense of community, and it varies in levels. And the motorsports community is a very real thing. And I think that people feel that, and that's why they're drawn to it to come out of quarantine. It's a social environment that they need, Sorry, just throwing that in.
No, for sure. And I mean, I think that was one of the things that maybe is why people gravitated back towards that, is because that community was still there. The support structure was still there, maybe not in as much as in person, but like, as far as like, how do you do this? Or I'm finally taking on this project that I thought I would never do. Here I am. Help me or point me in the right direction. And yeah, things just kind of kept moving.
You bring up a good point. About the community thing too, because if you look at like even the Cars and Coffee events, they were really well attended even when they weren't allowed to be happening. People were still showing up and occupying parking lots and stuff like that. And then I live by two of the better driving roads in the Front Range, and where it used to be on Saturday and Sunday, you'd see a little uptick of, the enthusiast activity. Now it's any day of the week, any time of the day or night. Even every morning I drive to work or something like that, and there's 10 more burnout marks on the highway than there used to be the day before. So, it's, and that's a much deeper pool for this market that probably really drives the performance market more than actual motorsports, maybe not in advancement of technology, but in, financial participation. And it's, an increase of participation there.
Yeah. Well, and for a lot of people, I mean, motorsports is something that they love to do. It's their hobby. It's something they enjoy doing. But there's another segment where that is their escape. That is their way to kind of unplug. Like, just, all right, I just need to clear my head. I'm going to go for a drive in the mountains. And there was a lot of that, I think, that happened in 2020.
I think on the subject of SEMA and on innovation and stuff, I felt like in 2019, especially when I went to PRI, the amount of new shit coming out was just crazy. Like, you had the Nexus coming out from Haltech, You had Turbo Smart with their crazy blow-off valve thing that was wild. I mean, you saw a lot of advancements, and I feel like for the most part, most companies are kind of buckled down and just stuck with what they're good at.
Yep.
And when you looked at, like, they had like kind of like the product showcase of like the newest stuff coming out of SEMA, like the award winners were just like basic stuff. Like Jeanette had mentioned before, the auto body repair and stuff is really big at SEMA. They had like those little gunny wheels. Have you seen those? Those little plastic wheels with like the hard rubber tires to move vehicles around in your shop and stuff like that, or take a nice set of wheels off and roll a car into the paint booth and paint the car without worrying about overspray. Like that one, there was 3 or 4 different companies who had those. I remember when that gunny wheel brand came out, which is like the orange one, and that was like the only one. There was like 3 or 4 different companies who had a version of that there. And those were the ones that won like best product for 2020 or 2021. So you can definitely tell, like, from a big manufacturing standpoint, that maybe it's because, I mean, just, I don't know, kind of the economy that we're in is like, instead of spending all this money on trying to do crazy new shit, we need to just try and stay afloat, you know, keep people employed and keep manufacturing stuff and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still kind of in largely in that steady as she goes mode. I mean, I don't think is necessarily the time to take a big swing and try something really radical, or really put a big amount of investment into some kind of crazy new product, unless you've got a really good reason to think that there's a huge demand for it. I think just it's a lot of it is just like consistency right now is a lot of the focus for a lot of the manufacturers.
Unless you're a big manufacturer like Ford, Chevy, Toyota, those dudes, I mean, they had the Hummer EV there. That thing makes 11,500 foot-pounds of torque, not 1,500, 11,000.
And it needs it because it weighs.
That's insane.
It needs that because it weighs 1 million pounds.
Yeah, it weighs 11,499 pounds.
Yeah.
But I mean, you still saw that Ford with the.
Is it true that you can't drive the Hummer during full moons because it affects the tides?
Oh, I believe it. Yeah. It's. I mean, you saw Ford. I mean, Toyota came out with their new car they pushed on to. We're just talking about how the Toyota Subaru venture with the electric car.
Yep.
The Hummer EV, I think, is going to be a big hit. Tons of people around that. The silly Ford Maverick that I'm like in love with. I kind of felt bad. I thought I was going to see a bunch of them, but I realized that the only Mavericks that were even out there were ones that Ford's sent out there. So the Mavericks were really only in the Ford booths, but tons of activity around the Mavericks. I mean, there are definitely some big corporate companies who continue to roll the dice and take a gamble, but you just didn't see that in like the smaller companies like Tile or Turbo Smart or Volk or whatever, you know.
Well, and I think part of that's because things are changing in the background, but like towards the kind of vehicles that people are looking for, and this whole electrification movement to electric vehicles that's happening in the background, and it's like nobody knows exactly what that's going to happen or what that's going to look like and exactly what people are going to want to do with those things yet. And like that's where, like, to me, hearing that Subaru is at least considering making a performance version of their electric vehicle, I'm very excited about that, obviously, because I mean that's kind of what we do, but it kind of gives me hope that, like, well, there's still that potential, even if the gasoline engine gets put on the shelf, which is, I mean, I think a foregone conclusion at this point. Is just a matter of when are we going to move entirely away from gasoline into an electric vehicle. But there's still fun to be had with these vehicles. There's still potential with these vehicles. But then a lot of these aftermarket companies, it's like, do you want to do a big investment now to try and make some new whiz-bang product that's going to make, a turbocharged car run better with an internal combustion engine, or do you take that capital and put it towards something that's going to help maybe the next generation of these electronic vehicles be better or handle better or do something better? I don't know. That's a hard call right now. Don't know.
And I definitely think it's fair to say that like companies like Ford and Chevrolet and Toyota have been these moves, like for the Maverick or whatever, these moves have been in motion for probably a lot longer than COVID has existed, and I think it was Ford announced in like 2019, right, that they weren't going to make any more cars except for the Mustang. And so when people are like, oh my God, what are they going to do? Well, they come out with this little Ford Maverick thing, and people are like, oh, like Ford is probably laughing when they were talking about, like, yeah, we're not going to make any more cars anymore. We're just going to make cars that look like trucks, and but I mean, I heard like the pre-order for the Mavericks is well over 100,000. Like, I feel like that's a success for them, So, I mean, big companies like that they probably look at this as an opportunity to really, because the consumers are still consuming at the rate that they are, because I feel like they really are. I think this is a good market to be releasing stuff into it if you had the funds and the backing and the time and the energy to invest into putting it into it, and maybe it ended up happening earlier or later than they expected, who knows?
What I think is going to be interesting is how much the enthusiast group drives things coming out of this, because like the people that are not interested in a car because it's just to get them from point A to point B, like they're not the people that are kind of keeping that fire going as opportunities went away or as events got shut down. The people that are keeping that fire going are the enthusiasts, and it seems like like the Ford Maverick or some of the new like sports cars that are coming out right now. They're catering to enthusiasts because the automotive market needs the enthusiasts to come back and get excited again about the new stuff that's coming out, like the new BRZ. I think is exciting. The new 400Z is exciting. There's a lot of really exciting platforms that are like, this is catering to the enthusiast base to kind of get people to think about cars, maybe if they haven't been as much, or just to really stoke that excitement to get people, to actually adopt these new things that they're developing and coming out with.
Yeah.
So I
think so.
I want to ask the two of you, other than these nice, responsible, forward-thinking ideas that we've been talking about, what was the coolest, just dumb, short-sighted motorsports thing that you guys each saw while you were there?
Jeanette, you want to start?
See, my answer is naive because I'm still learning so much about the industry. So seeing the Volkswagen Beetles that do like the Baja races were like singing to me. Like they like warmed my heart. I was so excited and there was actually quite a few of them. So I mean I feel like I got to know more about the off-road racing this event, and that got me really excited. So I was all about those little Beetles. That was a happy place for me.
I'm so glad you didn't say drift cars.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely talked about the drift car in that journalist meeting or whatever. They definitely talked about how drift cars have drift cars have been able to push products forward, like Falcon is like, you're like, oh, I don't know. I mean, but then you think about Falcon tires, and I feel like they've made like a huge leap forward because of their involvement with drift cars, that didn't exist before. But I don't know. I mean, it could be that they're bought by Sumitomo and they have much better advertisers, so who knows? But I think for me, I want to see time attack builds grow and get bigger and stuff, and there just wasn't very many there. But it was cool to see, like when you were around the race cars, like when you were around Dumas's car, it was cool to see people like, oh my God, like, and taking pictures of it, and really being into it and stuff. One of the things I was kind of glad to see was that there wasn't a bunch of YouTuber cars everywhere. Definitely there were there, but it didn't seem like, from years that I've watched before, a bunch of YouTuber cars. But I think for me, it was pretty cool to see the attention that the race cars were getting, like those hill climb cars were actually getting. And that was cool because there's, tons of trucks. And even though there's tons of trucks, there wasn't crowds of people around them all the time constantly. But every time we walked by Dumas's car, there was a bunch of people around it. There was another one of the red GT3s. It was kind of like orangish, pinkish red. GT3s that went up there, and there were people around it all the time taking pictures. But when we were around that Ferrari GTLM car, which one?
Is that the BBI?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
the BBI Porsches. Yeah, they got a lot of coverage. I saw a lot of pictures of the Porsches out there.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was wondering is, like, me, Tasso, Dusix, Jeanette, if any of our cars would have been at SEMA, would they have had a crowd?
I think so.
You think?
Yeah.
Not the BRZ.
I don't know. I mean,
car's,
with all the
your car's
stickers.
badass, Jeanette.
So I think our cars would fit in. I wouldn't say fit in, but they would definitely stand out among because like most of the cars that I would call enthusiast cars, right? That weren't like BBI Porsches or GTLM Ferraris or things like that. Most of the enthusiast built cars are outside. And there's no rhyme or reason to where they're at. You'd literally be like Brodozer, Carolina Squat, a Nissan Pal, a funny Subaru, and all this other stuff. Our cars, if they would have been in them, dirty with rubber on them, cracked windshields, a crazy aero, like your car, Scotty, or Jeanette's car with the supercharger, with the cage and the seat and all that stuff. I honestly think that those cars would have definitely gotten a good amount of looks out there. Outside, I think inside, I think there's a higher expectation, of the cars that are inside. Like, even though they're like the BBI Porsche and Dumas's Porsche were like immaculate. They honestly didn't even look like race cars. They were so clean. Yeah. But that GTLM Ferrari, it was so beat down that it looked like it was one of those wraps that was made to look like the car had been on fire and it hit like a wall. So when I said, Jeanette, is this a real car or a wrapped car? She's like, well, can I? It's like, no, like from here, because it kind of had that look that was really popular a couple of years ago where you had like a GTR or a Ferrari or whatever that looked like it was a track car with like the fake rubber and everything on the vinyl. But when you got up to this thing, I mean, that car was definitely beat on, like you've seen in years past where Porsche will bring out their track cars straight off of, a 12-hour endurance race. And so that car was, there wasn't a lot of that inside there though, but our cars would probably fit better outside. And I think they would have got some attention for sure.
We've all experienced that at Cars and Coffee before, where, I mean, they're so saturated with McLarens and Lamborghinis and cammed out Corvettes and stanced Pacers and stuff like that. And then, someone will walk by one of our cars and you'll hear them like under their breath, like say to their friend, like, oh shit, that one's an actual race car, that kind of thing. But it never, like, there's always that acknowledgement that always, it's always there, that like that little bit of like switch of different reverence that turns, but it never draws the crowd of, amateur photographers that are making their edits like the McLaren with a titanium exhaust does, right? That draws the cameras, even though like you'll hear it walking around later. Hey, did you see that Subaru race car that's over there? Yeah, I think like they actually race it, and so there's an acknowledgement. And I think it's sort of what you're saying too, where, we would do well in the outside portion. Like you'd get those walk-bys like, oh shit, that one's actually a race car. But it's not the 50-inch lifted, 20 shock having, chromed out, whatever, brake pad truck that's sitting outside there.
There's an irony with race cars, which is that they do real racing and real work. And that is not always a pretty work to be done. Like they have, scars of actually being on track and being used for what they're designed for and such. And so it equates it a lot more to a workhorse versus like a show pony. And, so there's the people that are really into it, understand that, they appreciate the fact, like I said, that is a real race car that they didn't just pretty up, for this show. That is a real race car that gets used and goes fast. But, the cars that are inside the building, kind of like what you're saying, like the pedigree is higher because these are like national or international championship winning vehicles that are held to, like, they are very effective race cars, but they're also held to a very high standard. But then for the grassroots people, I think would be the ones that most appreciate, seeing a race car that does real work versus a car that's maybe like brand new and had a lot of parts bolted onto it, but that hasn't set a tire on track yet and hit a cone or gotten any race rubber on it yet. So.
I'm not gonna lie, when I saw the GTA posts, I was like, I think I could beat that guy. And I had no doubt that, like, say somebody's car like ours was in, that companies, like, if you think about it from a GTA perspective or like Time Attack News perspective or whatever, if the big heavy hitters aren't there, they got to put something up. And those cars, that they did post, I mean, they're the closest thing that there's going to be out there to real-time attack cars that are enthusiast cars. Like, sure, you can show like that GTLM Ferrari, like, oh, that's sick, cool. None of us will ever own one of those, So, I mean, at least there's that. And it tells me that if our cars were in there with cracked windshields and a chunk of the wing missing off of it or whatever from like a big badass race, and that they probably would have got just as much love from those social media companies that tailor towards that than those other cars would have. I mean, you got to think about it like, yeah, I mean, they could have just not posted it and just not had the content. But ultimately, I mean, if they didn't post that, people wouldn't be seeing that kind of thing and be thinking, it wouldn't even be in somebody's mind,
Right. Those cars
But
are built with a certain amount of acknowledgement for having to be pretty, right? Where my car has, I mean, I guess I got a little vinyl on the outside now, so that makes a difference. But I can't tell you how many times, like, someone asked me, like, oh, can I look under the hood, right? And I pop the hood, and they're like, oh, so it's mostly stock? Like, no, there's no part of it that's stock, but yeah, it's an OEM later intercooler that I've modified. You can't see all the work I've done inside the heads. Maybe someone that knows what they're looking at sees, oh, look, an RCM tensioner poking out of there. I wish I had one of those, but that's like only the person that's looking for it, because I don't have a gold billet block and five GT25s sticking out of every hole in the front of the car or something like that.
You gotta up your polish and anodize game.
You know what you need? You need a sticker to put on the back window. We all need these stickers because I think it would be hilarious. Like #trailer queen, because our cars get trailered to and from events, but not because they're true trailer like show cars, but because they're like making fun of the show cars with having just like this beat up. I mean, I don't think our cars would beat the shit by any means, but in comparison to like the track inspired build WRX that's never been on track, I think it would be funny to be parked next to that with like just rubber, like just beat into the car, or dirt beat into the car with like #trailer queen.
Okay.
Well, I've personally seen Jeanette's BRZ as a monster truck before, out just smashing dirt berms in a field. So I know that thing gets down. So
maybe, to anybody that's still listening as we kind of get towards the end here, #trailer queen. Let's take it over. Let's do a Flatiron Syndicate takeover of #trailer queen. Yes.
Blow it up.
Nice.
Yeah, I think when people look at Jeanette's car, anybody who has their wit about them, like, dang, this car gets whipped, which it does.
Or this girl does not care about her car at all. Both are true. Not like I do love her, but it's an abusive relationship for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and Jeanette, I wanted to ask you before we go here, because you had posted that you went to, was it a Women in Motorsports or Women in the Automotive Industry panel?
Yeah, it was Women Who Rule Racing. So it was a women motorsport panel. Yeah, and that was super cool. But yeah, what was your question?
Well, just you. I saw you mentioned that it was really cool, so I just wanted to kind of expand on that just a little, if you could.
Yeah, I'm gonna not remember all the names, but it was led by someone who what's it called? The Bonneville Land Speed Racing. So it was led by her, and then there was another one of those land speed racers in the group, and then there was an off-road racer, and then the owner of the women's Indianapolis race team was there, and they kind of hit on a bunch of different things, women in the industry and the challenges that they have, but more importantly, like what they were focusing on was just their own personal journeys and kind of the idea of that women who are like, I shouldn't say women, girls who are like 12 or 13 years old are now just deciding what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. In some ways, whatever impressions that they have now is what's going to change their lives. So they kind of like brought up there was a female astronaut, the first astronaut, I don't remember, in the 90s or whatever. And that's when all these girls started going to space camp. So when they see a woman doing something, that's what inspires them to do it. So all these moves that these women are making in the industry, it's not even for full-grown women. It's almost they're starting at the younger age and then trying to be visual, just like, look, we can do this too. So it was very inspiring, and they were all very smart. women and who knew what they were doing. And it's just always good to like be around that kind of vibe. I hope that all made sense.
That's very good. Well, and you said yourself earlier that you're seeing more and more women come up to your track events. So I mean, it seems like because there are more women out there that are participating in motorsports in many different disciplines. And so maybe there's just more and more of that trickle down, more and more women that are getting inspired to go out there and check it out, try it out, participate. And so that's a good thing for everybody, I think.
Totally. No, and I think community has a huge part of it, is that they feel like that they belong. And I think the other part of it is just that idea of like, I can do this. Whereas before it's such a weird thing to think that someone has this idea that they couldn't do something. But we saw that. So this past Saturday, we had a women's drift event at PPIR, and Drift Colorado helped teach it. And Melissa Miller came out and helped coached it. And there were some women who were kind of like just starting to get into drifting. There were some women who drifted for a really long time. And then we had some very first timers. And it was really cool to see the first timers. It really was like, I just saw this and I want to try it. And I'm getting my girlfriend to do it with me. Let's do it. And like they didn't bring a man with them. They didn't bring anybody else with them. They just showed up and did it. And it was just the coolest thing to see. And I feel like that's not something that you used to see.
I would say probably
I think it's growing.
That's awesome.
Do you think I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this without it coming across as just ignorant or disrespectful or something like that. But so it's been now for some time, there's been some awareness or activism for women in motorsports. Do you think that the barriers are the same as they have been and we're still kind of chipping away at the same walls? Or do you think that those challenges have evolved over the years? Did you get any kind of indication from the panel about that or in your experience? Are we still fighting the same inherent biases, or is there any kind of change?
It's interesting. I kind of view the whole women question. It's always a discussion, and the discussion always changes. So, like, I'm going to get really weird. For example, the Me Too movement was a really great thing in a lot of ways, but it also brought up this awkwardness where people don't know how to behave around women in the corporate world anymore. So it's every challenge that you overcome. There's more challenges and the discussion just changes slightly. I do think a lot of barriers are coming down. I think that the Formula Women's team is like the most inspirational thing now that I understand it more, where they're removing the barrier of finances. They're creating an equal playing field, and that's something that applies to men too, but they decided to just do it with a women's team first, and then it might get moved into more of a co-gender thing eventually, but and that's something
Jeanette,
that we strive to do too. Sorry.
Okay, just real quick, so you're talking about the W series?
Yeah, that. Yeah. So they're because finances is a barrier that everybody has, but it's also a barrier that women have, and that's one of the things that we remove for like that women's drifter clinic. We keep it really inexpensive because that is a barrier that if you're half-hearted into trying something out and it costs a lot of money and you can do something else instead with that money, you're not going to do it. So if we remove that barrier, it gives you the opportunity to explore that area. So I do think that a lot of those barriers are going down and a lot of organizations are seeing that. And I'm using the finances as an example, but that just changes the conversation slightly. And it's not like, okay, done. It's all equal now. You know what I mean? It's not that simple.
What do you think? One of the things that I wonder about is from the spectator standpoint, because what I almost wonder is that we as spectators have to support women in coming out and doing these things as much as we can if we want women to come and do it. Because like I'm thinking from a sponsorship standpoint that like if a sponsor is looking at two different people and one of them is more of a known quantity and one of them is more of an unknown quantity, they're probably going to gravitate towards the known quantity to a certain extent. Being like a guy that's going to go out there and race, which you've sponsored 10 guys to come out and race before versus maybe a woman that's come up and has shown herself to be capable, but it's more of an unknown. And I just wonder if like we as spectators need to support the women that are coming up and going to these events so that sponsors can see that there is spectator support, that there is support behind these women that are trying new things or taking the chance of entering these new motorsports arenas, so that so that the women that are coming up can get the support, equal support to like these other people, like that are a much more of a known quantity, so that they can actually participate and compete and really have a chance to do well.
Which I think, and maybe I don't know, but I think that there is a huge spectator support for women in motorsports. I think guys and girls both get excited when a woman's out there in any capacity, whether she's being the sexy girl next to the car or whether she's the tomboy driving the car. I think that there's always excitement from the spectator side. I think opening the opportunity for more drivers is the bigger challenge. But I do think spectators support it.
Okay.
I think spectators could support all motorsports more, and
Yeah,
they should
absolutely.
come out and see
That's
us
true.
race
Yeah.
and do cool shit.
Totally.
But I mean, it is also you can't be everywhere at once, right? And the shit that we do is not televised yet. But I mean, I think we need more personalities. And I think historically speaking, women are a lot of times, sometimes more comfortable being kind of fun and cheeky on TV or on camera than your average race car guy. Most average race car guys are just like,
I actually
they're not
disagree with
they don't
that.
have as much. Oh yeah.
I think that the women that we see on TV, the fewer of them, it's because they are cheeky and comfortable in the skin. That's why they're there. But I think the women who would rather be awkward and antisocial, like a lot of men, actually have a harder time branching out than a man would who's awkward and antisocial.
From an outside perspective, I'm not trying to speak for anybody here, but right, I think that those people, there's a much more support for women who come in with a personality or are willing to play that role. And I think it's not right or fair. There's both genders meet resistances or challenges as time goes on. But I think the more that's you get the personality drivers. I mean, personality is always going to be a part of it for both populations, right? But I think that there's some kind of unfair support, and that dilutes then, people of either gender, but especially female drivers that deserve that support for what they're producing in terms of results and stuff like that. I think it dilutes the support for those people that I think really deserve more than they get just because they're not putting on that role.
It could also. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that's the challenge of the industry being a driver. I mean, there's so few that get to that level where they're a personality for a team or they're actually being paid to drive. And that's just the industry. We saw that with COVID, is that these NASCAR drivers who were hired to drive, all of a sudden they have to be marketable and not say racial slurs when they're in front of the camera. And it was like a huge challenge of like, oh no, it's not just about driving. You actually have to have a personality and learn how to speak in front of people. And I think that's a challenge for everybody in the industry who wants to grow professionally as a driver.
And I think to tack onto that, we had a pretty long conversation with Savannah Little about marketing oneself. And she said, it's like straight up front, I never tell anybody that I'm approaching to for sponsorship or for money or whatever that I'm going to win. I'm going to win anything. Her point is that in amateur motorsports, that's so much less important than like, hey, I can do this and I can market to this and I can help sell this. And these are like my strengths beyond my talent. And I think that I think everybody gets, especially us, since we're competitive, we get hung up in the idea, and I've been guilty of it too. I'm going to be the fastest Subaru Dakota. Sometimes it's like, I'm going to be the coolest dude at Dakota. Like maybe I should think about it like that instead, because you almost, when you get so hung up, and that was her point, when you get so hung up on trying to win, you miss all the opportunities that you can actually represent another company. And if we lower that expectation of ourselves or of other drivers, and think about it more actually look what they're actually able to do, or look at the kind of reach and stuff like that. I mean, that's I think is actually more realistic in a way.
Well, I would say not lower, but change, because any one of us here, or I'll say any one of you all here, that were actually going to put together a season, there's a lot of things you could point to from as a sponsorship sponsor that could get value of what you're doing for just going out there and doing what you want to do in running a series, winning not being a part of that, because it's the challenge of putting together the car, the challenge of running a whole season, the challenge of trying to find ways to be competitive, the challenge of trying to find a way to take the platform that you've chosen and develop it and refine it to get it to the point where it's improving or being more competitive. All of those stories and challenges, if a sponsor can, showcase that, there's definitely a value there. Yeah, you don't want to hang it all on winning or not, because there's typically, generally speaking, per race, there's only one person that wins. Usually.
Yeah, exactly.
Usually. So
yeah, it doesn't hurt if you are out there winning with all that other shit though. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a good point of not claiming that you're going to go out there and win, but that you can highlight the product or the company or whatever it is a little bit more, and having a personality. What was that, Tasso?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, Dussex, you have that personality where, like, I may not win, but I'm going to go out there and be the coolest motherfucker out here.
Don't compliment him. Don't. Look at that. Look at he's beaming.
Jeanette, give me a second. Because I was going to clarify. Because I was going to say he wants to be, but sometimes he's the most annoying motherfucker out there, depending on how many drinks you put in him.
Oh boy.
But
yeah,
it's still it's that personality, and you bring people together with that personality, and you really have a great way of highlighting what you're doing, the brand you're doing it for, and it's like that kind of personality is huge. I don't have that personality. I'm just an asshole most of the time. So
I don't think you do.
Drinks or not, depends how many drinks you get.
You don't think you
get
do,
to be.
Oh,
yeah.
Tasso, you actually called me out on at one of the Cars and Coffee about just like looking like I was grumpy the whole time, because I was. I mean, honestly, I had to hang out with people, So.
That's marketable, though. I mean, I think. I don't know. Maybe if you're listening or watching this podcast, you tell us if you think Scott's a cool dude, and that we should hear more from him.
What's your Instagram, Scotty? SK Hate. Go give him a follow. His car is beautiful, and his grumpiness is charming.
Charming grumpiness. That's interesting.
Nice. Okay.
Look how popular Grumpy Cat was.
There you go. Yeah.
See, we're breaking him down. We're breaking him down already, and he's over there cheesing it up now. But
this is.
Well, so I mean, just as a last thing that I'll say, and then I'll let you close this thing out. I've totally changed the way I approach sponsorship inquiries, like to a company where it used to be I would throw all these results. Like I had almost a full page of like, hey, look at all these first place finishes, look at all these podiums and championships and stuff like that. But now it's entirely like, hey, look at this social media reach I can get. This percentage of it is organic, so it's not even being paid. Here's how reels that I've posted have done over the last, and here's all, other partnerships I have that can expand your reach even beyond my metrics, kind of thing. And it's been, it's not like any of us is doing this for a living, but it's been more successful. Well, that's right. Okay, I guess all the rest of you are doing motorsports for a living in some capacity, right? But none of us are Lewis Hamilton or whatever, right? So it's been moderately more successful in just gaining support when I shifted my goalpost on what successful was in motorsports, and I'm still trying to win. Like my goal is still to win championships, races, and overalls.
Sure.
But that's not the avenue I take when it comes to forming partnerships with organizations. So
it's kind of the realization as you get into it and you're trying to put those seasons together is that there are more tools that you need to use to be able to get the support so that you can actually put together a successful season. And it's not only about winning, it's about the whole process, it's about the whole package, it's about everything that you offer to anybody that whose support you could use or need to put that season together.
And to my earlier point about parity between the genders, I hope that the response I get from organizations that I reached out to for support I hope that is also given fairly across the board based on merit. Was really what I was trying to say earlier, because it's, I can say all I want, that I don't care who it is as long as they're rad, but it's inherent stuff that we're fighting with a lot of these things. So.
And I think just to anybody who's listening is a fan of motorsports, is like, I think the best thing that we can do is support as many people that are putting forth the effort to go out there and participate and compete as we can. And because a lot of times support doesn't amount to much. It doesn't cost you anything. A lot of times it's just liking a post, following somebody, paying attention to what somebody that's doing is doing.
Exactly.
And if they say something that you like, if they do something that you think is cool, spread the word, share it.
Sure.
Exactly.
I mean,
it doesn't take
liking,
a lot.
No, liking and sharing what people are doing. I mean, hell, for us, I mean, if you're still listening to the end of this, thank you. You are our core podcast group. But the more people that have listened to the podcast and have shared it, gotten the word out about it. I mean, we're still a tiny little podcast, but we're bigger than we were a year ago. We're bigger than we were 6 months ago, because hopefully, I think the word is getting out, and that's just the support that the support that you can give anybody that is participating as a spectator it just goes a long way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, comment,
follow,
subscribe,
and share.
But it's real.
Yes.
I mean, it's the fuel that really feeds our industry at the amateur motorsports level, and I think
at this
all
point,
5 of us here are eternally grateful for the bit that we get.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and at this point, that is for every level of especially grassroots and amateur motorsports, that being able to show the support that you have is kind of everything, kind of what you got to there, Taza. Yeah. So don't be shy, like people, and pay attention to what people are doing. Yes. Like and subscribe, and then get the word out. Absolutely. Well, as we're winding down, it's been a good conversation. Dussex and Jeanette, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that we hit on about something that you saw at SEMA or something that struck you?
I'll just throw this one last thing out there. One of the things I really got when I was in Vegas, and I was kind of making a little bit of joke, like, I could live here, I could do that, is that if you're not doing motorsports, or you're not doing something that you love, I feel like right now it is the time of opportunity. And they talked about it in a couple of those classes, right, where people are going and doing shit that they want to do, like it is, and doing shit that they love, and they're taking steps towards that. Because I mean, if you ever wanted to work in a machine shop building 4,000 horsepower drag motors, you could fucking do it if you want to go there and do it. I mean, there are openings and opportunities in pretty much every segment in every industry right now across the country. And so I'm not saying, Scotty, quit your job, because you better stay there. But what I am saying is, if you're sitting at home right now thinking, man, I wish I could do that, if you're willing to make the sacrifices, like I was kind of making that joke with Jeanette this weekend at Vegas, but I mean, if you really look around, like I made that sacrifice, and I am absolutely just tickled pink by it and just so excited. So like, COVID has really created a lot of opportunities, and definitely don't sell yourself short on that out there, for sure.
Yeah. If you love motorsports, I mean, this is a time to look around and maybe see if you can find a bigger place in your life for it. Yeah, for sure. Jeanette, any final thoughts?
I agree with what Ryan's saying, and I think that's a good closing point. If I add anything to it, it's just that the industry is definitely not slowing down or giving up. There was so much energy, even though it was smaller, there was so much energy put into that event. And I see that, and I think everyone can agree everywhere in motorsports. So yeah. Definitely.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think with that is as good a note as any to end on. So we will wrap it up there. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your support. Remember, support amateur and grassroots motorsports. Like, subscribe, and share, and support us if you can. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for listening. And until next time, as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com, for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.